Retson this evening to speak. He's volunteered for many years with the Woodland Trust, both as a practically and in a leadership role. There's a slight change to his programme this evening. He's going to talk about current status and how the Trust's planning and policies are addressing the big global issues of climate change and biodiversity crash. And that's going to be illustrated from major projects such as the Northern Forest and local woodlands. So over to you now, Ian.
Right, thank you very much, Frank. Let's share my screen and we'll go straight off into the presentation if we can, if everybody's listening. Okay, if we can all see the screen.
Yep.
Good. Thank you, Harriet. Confirmation. I was going to do something visual. If you can look at this small picture of me at the top, you don't need to read this, but my introduction is about the two big issues that we have at the moment and the fact that we've got a lot in common, not just with the Wildlife Trusts, the Woodland Trust, but with the National Trust, the RSPB and all the conservation organisations coming together with some extremely common aims and objectives. And if I look here, this is the Woodland Trust's annual report for 2019, and this is the Wildlife Trust, if I'll show you the front, latest report for this year for the AGM coming up in November. When I look at the two of those, I see an excellent synergy between our aims and objectives. Moving on to my next slide, I'll take it from there. First one of those is looking at our vision, which is a UK rich in native woods and trees for people and wildlife. I open the Wildlife Trust annual review for 2019-2020, and I see a vision which says a landscape rich in wildlife, valued and enjoyed by all. It's very, very similar, and so is pretty much everything else in those two annual reports. This vision of ours and our strategy was produced, as you can see here, 10 years ago. And although it's halfway through at the moment, it is being rapidly superseded by events, both on the political scene and in the environmental scene. Things like Extinction Rebellion protests and a young Swedish girl you may have seen, bringing to the fore of everybody's agenda what really should be concerning all of us. And I'm speaking to the converted here, pretty obviously, but here's a bit of analysis that it's just off the top of my head when I look at who we are as organisations, and I think the National Trust have 6 million members, the RSPB have got 1 million members, Wildlife Trust 800,000 in total. Ourselves, we've got only 250,000 members, but we count supporters, and that's about 500,000. Add in all the other smaller organisations like the Countryside Restoration Trust and others that I know of and am a member of, and we'd get somewhere like 9.5, 10 million people. That's about 15% of the population. So my question here is, I wonder how many of the other 85% will get the message. Maybe half of them understand anyway. And I just want to pose that question for you tonight to start off things. How many of the population really understand these key issues? What we're trying to do, I will move on from this slide and go into what we've been achieving over the last 5 years. And the plan is pretty much the same. It's been superseded, as I've said, but our journey to 2025 was to plant a tree for every person in the country, increase our estate size by something like 30%. And secondly, to provide some real protection. I'm talking about legislation enshrining ancient woodland, that 1 to 2% of our woodland estate across the UK, into some kind of legislation to give it protection, the same protection you would expect for greenbelt areas, and we've had some progress in that in the last 2 years through Parliament, and the kind of protection you'd expect for ancient buildings, which are very well protected in most cases. I always used to say in my talks, you wouldn't dream of knocking down a cathedral to put a motorway through there, but an ancient woodland is fair game. Our third point is involving more people. That's everything from the individual through to large corporate bodies. And we do quite a lot with major players. Sainsbury's have been a big supporter of ours for many years. And Lloyds Bank have recently come on board with a very big contribution for the next 10 years. So that's very helpful. Last year, we planted 4 million trees. In some ways, it's a drop in the ocean when you see how many we need to plant to achieve the objectives for the future. I'm moving on now. This is where we have been marching forward since the general election last year. You might well remember the politicians falling over each other with increasing claims of how they were going to achieve the climate agenda promises of their strategies. And I distinctly remember hearing numbers going up and up, from 500 million trees to 1 billion trees to 1.5 billion trees, which is pretty much where it stopped with the winning party. Following hot on the heels of that, in January, we produced our emergency tree plan, the first one we have produced ever. And that was quite good because we had a change of chief executive. Becky Spate went off to the RSPB last year, and Darren came in having had 17 years of RSPB experience and quite a lot of other experience as well. He was a big man for the job. He'd been with us only 2 years in another director's role, and the name Darren Moorcroft seems to be very well known across conservation organisations. He knows all the chief executives of the large organisations. Big man for the job in most ways. He's 6'10", and he towers over most people at the meetings that we have. This is an ambitious project document, increasing tree cover, addressing both nature and climate emergencies. What is it? Well, in simple terms, in short terms, copies of it are available, of course, but looking after what we've got, this is following on from our 10-year plan to make sure that our ancient woodland is protected and the rest of our estate has good protection where it is proving value to wildlife in particular. Secondly, to make national government sit up and take notice of the promises they've made us in their manifestos. What kind of policies are they going to pursue in order to achieve these aims? What kind of capacity will we need throughout organisations? It can't all be down to our joint selves as voluntary organisations, charities, etc. We need funding and we need some assistance from national government. And thirdly, local authority actions. It's not just good enough having action at a national level. That needs to filter through properly and get the governments at local authority levels on board, properly on board. Now, why do we need this emergency tree plan? Well, I think we already know a lot about climate change and biodiversity or nature collapse, the number of species that we're losing numbers of. Look at the RSPB's long-standing red data list of birds, and it's very uncomfortable reading, and has been for many, many years, but we don't seem to be doing quite enough about it yet. I'm not going to talk about the benefits of woodland in any great detail, because I believe you will know an awful lot about that already. The government have promised that we will be carbon net zero by 2050. So what does that mean? The analysis is, I think, generally agreed on, that there is some kind of consensus that the overall average of woodland cover across the UK is 13%. The figures that were presented at Parliament 2 years ago showed that that across that UK 13% average, 19% cover in Scotland, down to 10% cover in England, and in between that for Wales, and a bit less for Northern Ireland. If we're going to achieve that net zero figure, from 13% moving up to 19%, means something in the region of well over 3.5 million acres of trees, 1.5 billion, which equates to the Conservatives' promise of the number of trees to be planted, if my memory serves me right. But let's just focus on whether that is actually going to be achieved, and how much more effort will we all have to put in to keep the pressure on, because our wildlife crisis is undeniable. The tree planting, there are some points that people might want to argue that a lot more trees are being planted than we might claim. And certain companies like Blue Sky, who do aerial photography, I remember I was talking to them earlier this year when I was getting some photographs, and I know the Wildlife Trust use some of their photographs. They're good. They're a local company, by the way, based in Ashby-de-la-Zouch, where I'm sitting now. And they said to me recently that although the figure for English tree cover is 10%, they reckon from their aerial survey maps that it's about 14%. So there's a bit of argument in there, but I don't think there's any argument of the fact that we've got a long way to go if we're going to achieve the end objective. 2016-17, 525 hectares of woodland, 10% of our target. Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail, because if you can see the graph in its entirety, and I'm not sure if I'm going to adjust my screen a little bit so I can see the edge of it. It shows from 2010 a whole range of stacked graphs for conifers. The left-hand one, I'm just going to highlight this in case your screens don't show it well enough. The first bar is coniferous planting, the second bar is broadleaf planting, and the third bar is the total. Progress looked pretty good, lots and lots of broadleaf for the first few years up to 2015, and then look at the last 4 years there. Very, very rapidly, coniferous planting has overtaken broadleaf planting, which has on average declined or stayed stable. In fact, in those 4 years, the total planting, 75% was coniferous. Now, that might be achieving some of our carbon capture objectives, some of them, but I would really question whether it's doing enough for climate control in all its different aspects, such as soil quality and flood alleviation. And obviously, it's doing very little for the biodiversity crash. So sometimes if you're seeing figures claimed that we're planting a lot more trees, you might want to look at those in a bit more detail. This is what some of the research for our emergency tree plan has thrown up, by the way. The local authority scene is quite encouraging. We sent out 300 letters to councils across the UK, and 130 responded with some kind of positive message, and we've got some highlights here. Cornwall in particular has taken us on as a partner. I think saying that they are going to reforest the county sounds a bit scary, but in fact it's going to cover about 2% of Cornwall. So it's taking them up to a decent percentage figure. Surrey, North Norfolk, GLA, a tree for every resident. Bristol going from 24 up to whatever it says there, up to 24% by 2046. And Cardiff going from 19 to 25. So a lot of cities are getting it. A lot of cities are wanting to claim that they are green cities. Let's hope that they follow those plans through. I don't know if there's anything more up to date than those figures. Two weeks ago, we did our second launch of the big climate fight back. Last year, some 300,000 people pledged to plant a tree in November, December time. And that was very encouraging. That tells you the numbers of people who are getting the message. The big climate fight back was launched by our chief exec just 2 weeks ago, and it has three clear objectives, some very simple ones. Plant a tree, get more people planting trees anywhere. We provide a lot of free tree packs on a twice yearly scheme. Issues are going out now. I've had some trees delivered today down to Tamworth to a youth club, and the second lot go out in March, and it's always oversubscribed. Our tree packs are available, by the way, for small groups such as schools, youth clubs. You can buy tiny packs of 10, 20 trees, right up to packs of 400 or so. And we will have special support available to landowners, farmers and estate managers, etc., who can have a dedicated project manager if they have a big project. So we do lots on tree planting, help and support for groups. Secondly, the usual online support. Our lobbying team are getting messages out to the politicians, and you can go online onto our website and speak up for the project. Donations, of course, as usual. So let's, I'm going to take that off so I can click the screen a bit easier. So that's where we want to go. Those are the aims and objectives. And there's some good news in there. A lot more people getting the message, and we're all putting the message across quite effectively, particularly with the help of the media and the David Attenboroughs of this world. But there are two areas of major concern, and we need to look at these briefly to see what the problems are. The first one is pests and diseases. I'm not going to go into this into too much detail because it would be the subject of a separate talk. When we think that of 23 major pests and diseases that are on our current threat list, 20 of them are current. The 6 major ones, the epidemic scale ones, are ash dieback, of course, is the biggest one at the moment for us. And not only is that going to threaten, so currently it says it's about 70 to 80%. There's some good news with some resilient species in, and genetic identification of what is causing it, so we can monitor resilience a bit better than we thought we would be able to do a couple of years ago. So ash dieback is devastating, 15 billion cost. It certainly is causing a lot of problems currently and everywhere across the country. But once that has settled, we've got the emerald ash borer following hot on its heels. And like some of the other diseases, there is more than one following on. So all these new approaching diseases that may not be with us yet, diseases and pests, I should say, there are an awful lot of them coming along. If we look back at Dutch elm, which devastated 20 or 30 million elms back in the 70s, that's still with us, still quite virulent in the wych elms in our hedgerows. But there is the zigzag fly, the elm zigzag, and that will be on its way to us, and that could further decimate the small amount of elms that we've got left in the country. And it's the same with oak, really. When we're looking at oak, sudden oak death, it used to be called, the dieback disease with oak, and then the canker. There is usually more than one. There can be a pest and a disease attacking the same species. And there's very little of our woodland stock of native trees that doesn't have something either attacking it now or threatening it. With 27 notifiable pests and diseases, it's a frightening statistics. And the question is, what are we doing about it? Our position statement is there for you to read. I'm not going through it in a lot of detail, just to say that once we realised in 2012 how serious ash dieback was, we took immediate steps to start sourcing all our stock from UK provenance so that we understand where every tree we plant comes from. This will be seed collected in the UK, seed raised in the UK, etc. We provide a lot of advice, and we have a few experts available and scientists who will help support other organisations. But I think it's fair to say personally that we're still learning a lot about it. I noticed the change from ash dieback being simply in the tops of trees to it being in the leaf litter at some stage about 3 years ago. And when I talked to one of our scientists, she said, purely out of coincidence, she said, I've been to a conference this very week and they're now saying that it's spreading through the leaf litter. It was obvious fairly much to me, as somebody who walks around a lot, that was happening, but the scientists took a while to investigate it. Legislation, of course, the lobbying is quite a big part for us, and advice to landowners. So that's what we're doing. Here's the latest map I could find for May of this year for the spread of the ash dieback across Leicestershire. And it pretty much shows that we had our first signs of it in the National Forest back in 2012, right at the beginning. Some people suspect it's been in the UK, by the way, for a lot longer, probably another 10 years. It just wasn't really known or recognised as such. But it's a frightening prospect, and it is ubiquitous. You cannot escape it. The fact that there are some white sectors there simply means there are no survey results brought in from there. The second major threat area, well, that's down to us as people. It's population pressure, it's projects for the economy and the infrastructure, some of which you may think are absolutely necessary, and some may be luxuries. Don't know, that's an individual subjective decision for us all. However, the biggest one at the moment, at the beginning of this year, there were 1,064 threats to ancient woodlands across the UK. The biggest single threat, of course, is on your screens. It's HS2, coming to a venue not too far from you in the distant future, ? Well, whether you like it or loathe it, I think it seems to be coming to some of the areas round us. Whether we get this 2B stage up to Leeds in its current form or not hasn't gone through Parliament, I believe. However, due to lockdown, I think they took advantage of the general population and the fact that we were all shut away in our houses, and they started decimating woodlands along the route, much to the dismay of a lot of the small local protest groups in the towns and villages who were very concerned about their ancient woodlands. It's a sad and a sorry story. I don't know whether we will all see the end of it. Personally, because it will be going through the countryside quite close to where I live, I just don't know whether I'll see it in my lifetime or not. There we are. That's the threats. I want to move on now because the time for the talk is galloping on, and I've got two other major sections I want to cover. The first I'm calling land scale projects, and this is to give you an idea of how the Woodland Trust are tackling those key issues that I've just been addressing across Scotland, Wales and England. So I'm bringing it closer to home gradually, but I'm starting up north, right at the top. I want to show you some of our major land scale projects, they're called. It's approaching the issues on a landscape scale, conjoining words as we tend to do in the media nowadays. I'll start with our largest property, Glen Findless. It's 12,000 acres in size. It's part of the Great Trossachs Forest National Nature Reserve, as you can see here. It's something like 100 square miles of the Trossachs and Loch Ardaig. It's a big tourist area and has been, to my remembrance, all of my life, having spent a lot of my childhood up there, having a Scottish father in the area. But Callander, big tourist area, Loch Catron is the heart of it, up from Loch Lomond. It's a lovely area for mountains and walking. And this is a big project, which is the first one I'm going to mention about partnership. We're working in partnership on this project, not only with the Scottish Government, who are backing it and helping to fund it, but with the RSPB, who've got a 2,000 acre reserve next to us, and with the Forestry Commission, who own a very large part of the rest of it. Our 12,000 acres was some of our first major purchasing in Scotland, starting in 1996. And we added to the estate until it was a whole 12,000 acres. I think in summary, what I'd say about this area and the fact that those beautiful purple heather-clad mountains of Scottish scenery that we'd be familiar with as traditional were not always traditional. They were caused largely by the Highland clearances in the mid-18th century, when the crofters were moved off. Many of them, including a lot of my relations, would have cleared off to the colonies, as they were called then. And we find that the sheep and the deer were allowed to rampage the hillsides. All the up-and-coming new trees were nibbled down, and they were kept down very effectively over the centuries. What we do with a property like this is we look at the soil. Doing a soil and a geological analysis initially will help us determine which kinds of trees would best grow naturally there and would most likely have been there in the past. And then we'll try and replant areas to meet those objectives. When we plant a wood or a forest, we're not talking wall-to-wall trees. I better make the point that that definition of a forest as a a dense bunch of trees, as I've always called it, has only been around for 100 years since the Forestry Commission created it in 1919. And those coniferous forests, a lot of which exist in Scotland, are being addressed by sensitive clearance and replanting with broadleaf species. What this does primarily is it brings back that balance of nature, and we're talking about the species not only of trees that we would want there, the Scots pine that would produce nice spatial areas in forests, because the pine forest, the Caledonian pine forests, tend to have a lot of open space in them, and those are places where we are encouraging red squirrels, pine martins, a range of birds coming in across them. It's an area that is rich with potential to provide some of the solutions to our wildlife and nature crises, and I think also to help with tourism, providing things like webcams of our osprey nests. It helps to educate people as well. It brings more people on board remotely in the way that we're doing this now. So that's Glen Findless. Second one I want to mention, because some of the aims and objectives are common across here, I'll do 3 in Scotland, is Loch Ardaig, and this was purchased in 2016. It's above Fort William, Speen Bridge, where the famous Commando Memorial is. And we have a loch, some mountains, we've got a lot of forest, much of which is coniferous plantation, the typical Sitka spruce stuff. And we have, as you might see here, some granny pines, but very occasionally amongst the plantations. We've got something like 3,500 acres on this one. I think it is, 2,500 acres, sorry, Loch Ardaig. And adjoining landowners, Forestry Commission again, but we bought this from Forest Enterprise back in 2016 with the aim of encouraging and replenishing some of the small areas of rare ancient pine wood, the old birch and oak woodland, and taking out the non-natives, putting back in trees like oak, juniper, hazel, aspen, alders, birches, encouraging not only the wildlife that I've mentioned, but also wild boars and otters. It's big country up there in the west of Scotland, and there is a lot more potential to embark on the type of projects that you wouldn't get away with in much of England. I'm thinking about rewilding type projects and introducing species which have long been extinct, like the wild boar, that cause big problems politically and are very sensitive in somewhere like the Forest of Dean, but are much less contentious in parts of Scotland. So Loch Ardaig, somewhere that I must get myself up to fairly soon. Excitingly, further up the west coast and just a little bit further up there, sort of a bit further up from Skye, but quite close to the coast, is Ben Shieldag. We bought our first mountain last year with much ado. 2019 saw us spending £1.6 million on this mountain. It's nearly 4,000 acres worth. And in the same way as you look at my head with a bare top in the middle and a fringe round the side, this is the problem with Shieldag. It's got a fringe round the edges. And that fringe is very precious land, precious woodland. We're talking here of, I'm just going to put a pointer up here, these areas. And I think one of them, I think it's the northern side, is Caledonian pine forest, one of the rare remnants that still exists. And the other one is birch ancient forest, stuff that goes back to the Ice Age, this remnants of precious land that we want to try and recreate some of this forest environment gradually and involve different communities, not just the local village communities, but the wildlife communities, broadly speaking, because when we plant the trees and we look at the overall environment, we're taking in the woodland, yes, we're taking in the birds, we're taking in the mammals and the rest of the wildlife, but we're also analysing everything else that is part of that ecosystem. In this particular area, we've got some quite interesting lichens, bryophytes, liverworts, fungi, all those kinds of life are quite precious and part of our consideration of what we will plant and where, in short. So 3 projects in Scotland, they're big scale things, and we want to make sure that we capitalise on them and link them up because they've all got neighbours with similar amounts of land. Moving across into Wales, we've got 1 or 2 interesting things happening in Wales. The overall estate of our woodland across Wales is only just over 7,000 acres. So, put 2 of those projects in Scotland together, and you've got the whole of our Welsh estate of 100 or so woodlands. September of last year, so I'm keeping to reasonably current projects. This is Neath in the background, by the way. So I've got the pointer up there still, and that will. Sorry, I'm just going back to the pointer so I can move on quickly. This area with Swansea, Neath, and all the heads of the valleys settlements in Wales has got some woodland. The majority that I've visited is either coniferous plantation or it's pretty dense birch and alder down in the valleys. There's a lot of interesting areas. We've got 175 acres in Brunel Woods, and this is our flagship site in Wales at the moment, with a lot of planting going on. We've got something in the region of, I'm just looking for the figure of trees, but it's going to be 150,000 in total over 5 years on this site. And there's a Welsh project called Plant Project, and that means that the Welsh government want to plant a tree for, and this is interesting wording, every child, next 5 years. Yes, plant a tree for every child born or adopted in Wales. So they're trying to be very inclusive with it and bring along the community, encourage people. I think that's a really nice idea for them. So that one's going ahead just now, although I should think it's a bit slow on the ground. There are some nice species in there. There is one, by the way, as well as Dubbenton's bats and barn owls, they have found the very rare blue ground beetle in Brunel Woods, which had a small pocket of ancient woodland in it. So they're hoping that extending the woodlands, buying adjacent areas of land and planting up will allow species to spread in the standard way that you do with land acquisition. And another one of our partners I will mention is the Nationwide Building Society, who are providing a lot of support to us. 60,000 trees across the UK they are committed to planting over the next few years. Another project in Wales that I'm not going to show you any pictures of might be a bit sensitive to some people, but Summit to Sea, it was called when it was first started in 2018. And the idea was 100 square kilometres of land from the sea, so it's covering a marine environment, up to the top of Plynlimmon along the Dovey estuary. and that takes you from sea level up to about 2,500 feet. And the idea was to look at this as a partnership project. It was led originally by Rewilding Britain, an organisation that not everybody approves of. And I think the events of last year obviously show that some of these larger projects can be contentious. So I'll throw this one in for you as something to consider. Rewilding is something I've got, well, I quite like it, shall I say. Having read Isabella Tree's book, I'm sure a lot of you have read that one, about the Knepp estate in Sussex. And that is a fabulous place to visit, a haven for purple emperors and the plethora of wildlife bringing back turtle doves. It shows that you can farm a land in a different sense. I think farming there is nowadays is more to do with using people and making a living out of them than actually digging up the land. And these kinds of wilding projects, it would appear that this Summit to Sea project in Wales frightened the locals quite a lot. I don't know all the details of it, but at back end of last year, Rewilding Britain were forced to withdraw from leadership of the project, and the RSPB company took it over. We're one of the partners in that project, and I'm quite keen to see how it progresses. It's part of the world I love personally, very much. We're a partner in it, as are the Wildlife Trust. You know, Montgomeryshire Wildlife Trust are one of the key partners in it, and Worldwide Fund for Nature, which I assume their part will be to do with the marine environment on the coast. So fascinating idea of bringing together projects that are not just planting trees, but looking at the whole plethora from molluscs to mountaintops. The other one in Wales is a very recent introduction, and I've borrowed a map. It's the best I could do to illustrate what this one is about to you. The Welsh National Forest, a forest to cover Wales from north to south, linking up areas and providing one of the most exciting wildlife corridor concepts that I've seen for a very, very long time, if ever. Coming over from increasing the woodland in town areas close to Merseyside, like Retson, going through the Snowdonia National Park over to the area that I was just talking about with the Summit to Sea, with its bits of Celtic rainforest and its whole environment, going across mid Wales, those Cambrian mountains, that most empty part of Wales, which is fabulous red kite country, right down to the valleys across the Brecon Beacons and ending up at Wentwood Forest, which is a huge area of mostly replanted ancient woodland. 1,000 hectares. We have a third of that area. So the Woodland Trust have got about nearly 1,000 acres of it. And that's quite a good tourist area. Lots of exciting things happening down there. I've got no idea how this project will progress. I know they want to pump some money into it from the Welsh government, and I think all I can say on that one without any further ado is good luck to them. I look forward to it. Leap back into England now, because it was mentioned, Frank mentioned at the beginning that the Northern Forest was part of my presentation. We started this 2 years ago, January 2018. Already all the forests in those areas like White Rose Forest and the South Yorkshire Forest had been going for quite some years, probably 20 years or so they've been going. And it's an area where in concept it sounds quite simple. Again, I think there will be a lot of contention in some of the areas. People will be frightened by the fact that we want to plant 50 million trees in some areas where there are a lot of fields for agriculture. I'm talking about East Yorkshire, you know, around Beverley and over the Yorkshire Wolds is a massive agricultural area. I'm going to explain this. 25 years, 50 million trees, 500 million. The government threw in £5.7 million to kick it off. And they don't just throw money at these things. They had worked out quite carefully the return on investment. It is reckoned that for spending £500 million, and I would guess that this is related to their northern powerhouse and northern hub theories at government level, that investment of £500 is going to benefit the economy by something like a ratio of 5 to 1, so returning £2.5 billion. Interesting. Let's have a look at it. The M62 forms the spine of the project, but it by no means covers just that small area you can see highlighted on the screen in green. This was the initial analysis done before 2018, and it was done very carefully over quite a long period of time. Several scenarios were studied in detail, and these pictures graphically show you what two of them really look like. We don't want to plant trees just anywhere. That's not acceptable to anybody. Why do we want to plant them? Well, carbon capture is just one of the issues, but the other one I've summed up as quality of life, because there are some pretty big issues in this area of the north of England, particularly round the Leeds, Ouse Valley area, York, where there was some most severe flooding. You remember back to last winter and Doncaster floods for what appeared to be months on end. We can help with tree planting, and that's one of the considerations, flooding, health benefits. We're looking at urban health here as well. Child asthma rates are rising in cities. We think it might be to do with pollution. And although we seem to have got Clean Air Acts since the 1940s, we move on to a different kind of pollutant. The poisons migrate, as with people. Looking at what we've got here then, we've got the Pennines down the middle, we've got the Humber Estuary across the east-west, and we'll start with the nature at work scenario. This is looking at planting 50 million trees to provide flood defence, soil quality, health benefits, and that's primarily for the urban area, and to improve the biodiversity. You can see that's lots of green spots over a wider area, but it's very well spread out, and 50 million trees would look quite diluted across that landscape. If we look at the dash for carbon scenario, which was purely to create carbon, and we're talking about creating biomass for power stations, because Drax Power Station is in the heart of this area, and that consumes a massive amount of biomass, much of which I believe has been imported. But it's about creating energy, and they reckon that the dash for carbon was primarily a rural project if it was to go in that direction. So what we've ended up with is something of a compromise, but veering more towards the nature at work scenario. And that gives us flood defence proofing on the dash for carbon bit, round leads, 2 million trees going in there. But most importantly, 25% of the trees are going to be planted in urban areas. And that's going to help that 13 million people who live within this catchment area to understand more of why we're doing it, and it's expected to involve a lot of them. Get them involved is the best way to educate them. Start them young and carry on. This is just I'm not going to dwell on this one, but this is just to emphasize the fact that 25% of the tree stock of that 50 million trees is going to be planted in urban or urban fringe areas for the benefit of the populations there. We did projects like Woods on Your Doorstep to emphasize that kind of practice many years ago, in fact, for the millennium, so 20 years ago. And those are some of the main quality benefits of planting trees in your urban areas. I think it's fair to say we all like trees. Right, projects coming nearer home, rapidly moving nearer to Leicestershire, right on the border, in fact, 2019, Mead. This is the first of our Forest of Youth projects. In total, we'll be having 400 acres of planting. There's a lot of it gone on already. I think we've planted something like 150,000 trees already. And we're getting lots of youth and community groups involved. You can see that it's gone from Opencast Mining to family activities, putting trees in the ground. And as important to this, it's adjacent to Derbyshire Wildlife Trust property and Shipley Country Park. So between the whole lot, we've got a huge area of potential for the wildlife, for the whole biodiversity to spread and be encouraged, which is one of the core concepts, again, of what we do with partners. So what does success look like? I'm going to go quickly through a couple of these. I'm aware of the time galloping on towards an hour. What does that success look like? If we think about these projects that I've shown you are all very new, some of them brand spanking new, we can prove to people through the National Forest that it works. Starting back almost 30 years ago in 1991, we have literally gone, as the slogan says, black to green, particularly in the heart of the National Forest, my own main area. So I hope some of you will be aware of these names and places. Sorry for my host group at Oadby and Wigston that I haven't got anything local and pertinent to them, because I've done talks in that area quite a few times, and there aren't that many of our woodlands in close proximity to the Oadby and Wigston estate area. However, the National Forest, we have 200 square miles, started 1991. The first tree was planted at one of our local woods at Willesley, by the way, by Michael Heseltine. And this graphically shows you the top two are Sents Valley, which is a local authority woodland and a wildlife haven with several lakes and ponds, wet areas, and good tree cover. It went from being a massive open cast to being a wildlife haven and a visitor centre. It's a very popular place. The bottom two show Hicks Lodge, which now hosts in the building you can see there, the new building, the a national centre for cycling and off-road cycling, which is very prominent. But importantly to me, this small island of trees in the middle of this open cast area, I remember going to visit, trespassing to visit this, to have a look at the potential and see what was left. And they just kept a crown of trees. There's some lovely old cherries and one or two really nice oak trees still left in that crown at the highest point of the Hicks Lodge estate. But not only is it a cycle centre and a visitor centre and cafe, etc., it has some nice wildlife. They've got a very large lake there, which the LRWT have helped to set up with a bird hide, with some bird islands, and there's a lovely sand martin bank built into it. So, you know, we're looking at these as multi-purpose environments in partnership. It's not one of our sites, by the way, it's Forest Enterprise, but those are just two graphic examples. I'm going to move quickly on from the National Forest, just giving you some statistics. We reckoned that the target was going to be no more than a third woodland cover. Initially, it was going to be in 20 years, but we're at 21% woodland cover from 6% average. And that average covers Charnwood Forest and parts of the Needwood Forest on the Trent Valley side. So this central area where I'm focusing now with these examples had no more than about 3% woodland cover by 1990. It was denuded mostly by opencast mining, not just for coal, but for clay. We've put 9 million trees in. Visitors are a big part of it. Some of the population pressure is showing that we've got massive house building projects because people find this a very attractive place to live. But we are getting the true definition of a modern forest is a diverse economy, as it says here. It's an economy where we can afford to generate environments which are good for otters and crayfish, etc. And people enjoy visiting, hopefully without too much detrimental effect on the wildlife. Our Woodland Trust, two examples here then, Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Wood. 1st of June 2012, we opened it officially. You might recognise a certain Princess Royal there, planting a black poplar, which is still there. It's doing quite well at the moment. It was given a head start over some of the other trees to make sure the royal tree was given the right treatment. And we've got 460 acres there of a very mixed environment from ex-farmland and opencast mining. You can see which bit was opencast mining in the centre here with the lake and the bird hide, but some ancient woodland at the back, and the rest of it was farmland or open land which had been left fallow for several years. It was good before we started. It is better now. We did have curlew on site originally. We've got plenty of waders, snipe, etc. We've had some special visitors. Short-eared owls are a big attraction. 2017 through the winter, we had a hen harrier, a ringtail, female, resident for the winter, and she drew birders from all over the country. And barn owls, linking again, not just with Sents Valley, which is on very close by, it's adjacent, but also with one of your Wildlife Trust properties over at Kelham Bridge, where there are barn owl boxes, and that makes a nice environment for the barn owls to migrate from somewhere that hasn't got all the best hunting ground for the barn owls at Kelham Bridge over to our land where the trees are quite small still, and there's a lot of wide open area, very suitable for vole hunting. And we've also got something else for the barn owls up here. Our new visitor barn is frequented by them, as you might just be able to see some of the droppings from their nighttime sojourns in there, and I quite often find barn owl pellets in there as well. We've got 60 groves, and there's the whole plethora of things that you'd expect with a diamond Jubilee wood. I put these two posts up normally because dedications are nice, but I like what they say. Thank you for a life in which I can help trees, and breathe, it'll be fine. I think they sort of engender some of the ethos of what we do very succinctly. This year, we have started planting our 200 acres of extension, the first 126 of which were planted up in March, at the very beginning of March. March the 5th, just before lockdown started, we had a major planting day, and we had 103 people attend. They put a couple of thousand trees in. Contractors did the rest. This is what the landscape looks like. Now, you can see a nice riparian area. There's a brook that feeds down towards the Meese, eventually to the Trent. And with the Trent Rivers Authority, in consultation, we have put scrapes, banks, and some of these log blockades in to put damming in to clean up the water, to take some of the phosphates from agricultural runoff out of that water course, and to make sure the water that's going further down the system is clean. And it's making for a very pleasant looking environment, attracting waders, attracting skylarks, and all sorts of game birds in the early years. So that is going to be good. It's going to be very good. Oh, she's here again. Princess Royal came back again in October this month, just on the 3rd, and she planted a nice oak for us and came round and looked at the progress and helped raise the profile of the site with this extension. So 640 odd, 650 acres, pretty good for one site in the National Forest, the largest single site by a long way. My local wood, Willesley, I'm going to whiz through this because I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but this is an example of what progress can be achieved over 20, nearly 30 years. This is roughly what it looked like near the beginning. We had planted up these fields, but we'd got some secondary woodland that is at least 120, 130 years old. And this is what it looks like nowadays. That looks like a very densely wooded site. And for that reason, I'll show you in a minute why we're doing something about that. But we've got two lovely, lovely patches of woodland, which is at least 200, 250 years old. It's probably ancient woodland. We've got anemones, we've got wood sorrel, you can see in there, and we've got lots and lots of bluebells through those two areas as well. They were saved from the Opencast Mining when that was taking place in the late 40s and early 50s, and I suspect they would be maintained as probably as coverts, as fox coverts or pheasant areas. In the earlier years, we got a lot of orchids coming in, and it's nice to get some clearance done again to see the southern marsh orchids and the common spotted orchids growing, which, by the way, have hybridized massively. So most of the orchids are common spotted southern marsh hybrids at the moment. We've got some areas of the new planted woodland that have got a lot of broad-leafed helleborines in. They haven't been too successful due to rabbit predation. We've had something like 20, 25 species of butterflies recorded on the site over the years, and the numbers are growing because the forest is providing a developing environment that is encouraging more species to come up. I mean, brown Argus is one I just chose because it originally is a chalkland species that is migrating northwards gradually with climate change, and we're providing environments for some of these species to be able to move further north, moving up to the northern forest, moving up to some of the Scottish ones eventually, perhaps. A National Forest Biodiversity Action Plan target species, ruddy darter, recorded on the site. And we've got something like 15, 16 species of dragon and damselflies on the site as well. We've got a massive amount of them. In fact, I saw quite a large, busy hawker this very morning out by the lake. Birds, of course, I mentioned red data listed birds. In the early days, we could see 5, 6 pairs of reed buntings bringing up their young, moving them from the opener areas where they were nesting down to the lakes for feeding and overwintering in the hedgerows and the edges of the woodland. I've got about 100 species of birds on my list over the years, but I haven't seen some of them like the woodpeckers, apart from the green woodpecker, for quite a while. Now, the Wildlife Trust did a report on 3 target woods in the heart of the National Forest recently, and we have used this report on Willesley to inform us to do our major thinning, because it's nearly 30 years old, some of this planting, and it's well overdue for thinning to improve, primarily to improve the biodiversity. What the Wildlife Trust report said, and it's things that I've wanted for, in some cases, for quite a while. This one illustrates widening one of the main rides and putting some scallops in. And here on the right hand side, I just want to show you briefly this. You might not be able to see. This is one of our crabapple trees that I've made sure has been spotted for preservation, because the scalloping would have taken it out, but that crops beautifully sometimes. So that's part of it. The thinning here, this exemplifies what we're doing about ash dieback, and David, the site manager, has decided that this grove, which we planted as a British Legion Memorial Grove back in 2002, is to be his main project for ash dieback thinning. So these ash, it's 80% ash. That ash has been clear felled, with the exception of a few trees you can see here that looked in July as if they were good, healthy specimens. So we'll be monitoring those to see if they survive. A live experiment. We're going to be replanting this with a mixture of hornbeam, alder and birch. So I can't wait to see how that progresses when the work's finished. There's a 30% thinning across most of this area, and it looks good. I'm going to finish, because I've gone over my hour, with an apology for not getting to anything about ancient trees or our protect and restore our ancient forests section. All I'll say on this one, I'm not going to apologise for having taken this with my little box brownie, which I first got in about 1960, because it's a precious family photograph to me. Not many of them left. In fact, there's only one there left, but it shows what the major oak was like in its heyday. In 1957, the highest number of visitors ever went to Sherwood Forest to look at the major oak in particular. Some 15,000 people on August bank holiday. That's how popular it was. And we're looking forward to regenerating some of that traffic through the new project. Of course, Sherwood is being led by the RSPB, but we are in consultation over management and preservation of the ancient tree stock. That's a historic monument. We're not allowed to get within, 60 or 70 feet of the major oak nowadays, but I want to see more progress there. It's just one of those great projects that we do together, doing it together. That's my message for tonight. And there's a reminder of what our joint aims really are. It's what we believe, and that's what we do everything for. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to stop my sharing now and have a drink of water whilst people come back.
Thank you, Ian. That's a great talk.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions in the Q&A box, so we will, Frank and Stuart will work their way through those.
Good, I'll see if I can answer them.
Okay, Ian, here we go. So Fred has asked, why is it when new housing estates and road alterations like the one at Junction 23, they decimated a rookery that had been there forever and a day, and the trees that have been cut down by HS2? So I think that's a comment that is shared by many of your audience today.
I think it is, yes. And I'm no expert on planning and tree preservation. I'll say that up front, that I don't really know what kind of an answer to expect, that people would expect from that one, except to refer back to what I was saying about planning laws. There is very little legislation that will protect trees. If they've got a TPO on, it doesn't matter. For the sake of economy, they will say it's for the better good. And that happens time and time again. All those 108 ancient woodlands that are being sacrificed, wholly or in part, for HS2 are a great example of it. We've seen a lot of public protests put up there to no avail. They are bought off by government pressure saying we need this railway line. And I think when you talk about housing estates taking out rookeries, etc., then the government have mandated that all local authorities must meet their housing targets or be penalised. And that, unfortunately, means the houses have to go somewhere. Personally, I'm not sure why we need so many houses, but the politicians seem to know better.
Okay, so we have a question from Bruce. How many tree nurseries have you and where are they?
Oh, right. Hey, this is one, my homework might be able to answer that one, Bruce. We've got 26 across the UK, and they are spread from Scotland into northern areas, right through the Midlands, down to Herefordshire, the borders, some in the southwest, 26 approved suppliers. So they will be independent businesses. I'm talking to one of them at the moment called Botanica, that's down in Kent in the southeast. And their remit is to prove to us that all their stock is grown from UK sourced seed that is raised and grown in the UK. So 26 of them. The nearest ones to us here in the Midlands would be a couple of them in Lincolnshire, and I know there's one in Warwickshire, somewhere further out in Warwickshire. But I can't give you chapter and verse on where they all are without looking them up again. I hope that answers that one.
Okay, thanks. So we've got a question from Chris next. Do you do any vegetation monitoring, for example, to see if planting of the trees does indeed lead to an increase in floral diversity?
Yes, we do. We encourage surveys, particularly with the specialist groups through the wildlife trusts. And a lot of our sites, Willesley that I showed you latterly, is one of the target sites for the Northwest Group. And they do monitoring there. We've had bat surveys done, we've had floral surveys done. It's a baseline site for the National Forest. Some of our meadow areas, when we're talking about floral growth, we will maybe monitor them for the first 10, 15, 20 years to see what grows naturally. And over the last few years, we have done a few experiments of putting wildflower seed mixes into some of these meadow areas to encourage them. I might say that we are Woodland Trust. We're not in a major way into meadow recreation, but we will do our bit towards it as part of the overall environment.
Thanks very much. The next question, it takes us back to local authorities from Paul. So what degree of interest and support has there been from Leicestershire County Council and its constituent borough? How do local communities identify the ownership of land to find sites in which trees might be planted?
Right. I don't know the specific answer. I can't answer for Nick Rushton what the true intentions of Leicestershire County Council are. I know that the County Council over the years have provided tree packs to individuals, to schools, to clubs and organisations, and they have given out a lot of free trees to residents over quite a number of years. local authorities, mine is northwest Leicestershire, and again I think they have had some tree schemes, but we've worked with them. We've worked with Leicestershire County Council as an organisation. I know the Woodland Trust have spoken to them about recycling Christmas trees, for instance, and providing these free tree packs and helping to source them. That's as much as I know. It's precious little, I'm afraid, to say what the policies of Leicestershire are. The political side of it and the lobbying side of it are not my great strengths.
Okay, well, final question of the day from Kate. Yeah,
Yes.
a bit more of a challenge here, Ian.
Oh.
What safeguards are the Woodland Trust taking to make sure their tree packs are planted in the right place so that A, they survive, and B, they don't degrade other important habitats?
Right. I think that's a brilliant question. I love it. Thank you very much for that one, Kate. My experience of it is that firstly, our tree packs all come with advice sheets. We will talk to people when they first source the trees about what they're going to do with them. We will give them advice where they ask for it one way or another. And if the project is of sufficient size, scale or importance, we will send somebody along from a management perspective to have a look at the site if it's a big one. In the case of planting, we provide details of planting, where to plant them, how to plant them, and how to maintain them. So things like spacing, tree guards, and a quick guide on how to put them into the ground and the ongoing maintenance. Where it's a relatively small project or it's in an inaccessible area, well, that's where people like me come in as volunteers. And I'm doing a project with a club in Dosthill, Tamworth at the moment. Their tree packs arrived this very lunchtime. We're getting something like 500 trees in the ground on a large area of playing field. And I've been for discussions twice. I've looked at the ground. It looks quite good ground for growing, and there are some trees in the vicinity. So we're looking at draining a couple of areas that are very wet, and we'll be doing a tree plan next week for planting in this tree season. We want to make sure that they're planted at the right time of year, one of the key things. We want to get the spacing right. We want them to have a plan in place for inter-row mowing or making sure that weeds don't cover them. But bottom line, normally across any large tree planting, historically, I've experienced and I've heard of usually up to 10% attrition. So we can expect losing a small percentage of those trees over time. And we can expect things like the pests and diseases coming along. We didn't know about ash dieback when we planted millions and millions of them. We've got to rectify some of those things, but we would normally, in a normal planting, make people aware that if there is some attrition over time, then they need to get some more trees and replace them, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time.
Brilliant. Well, thanks ever so much for addressing the questions, Ian. I'm going to hand back to Frank for the formal vote of thanks.
Good, thank you.
Well, it really is a great pleasure to thank you for such a wonderful talk. One of two distant trips out, taking a whole hour in the car that we've made from home. My wife and I, from here in Oadby, has been to Willesley Wood. And can I just recommend it? We've found out about it on some excellent online leaflets from the Forestry Commission. But that really was, well, wonderful and inspiring. Gives us a lot of hope for the future and a lot to do. And I think we've sort of informally, my wife and I, while you've been talking, had a kind of chat with each other. We're certainly going to join the Woodland Trust on the basis of this. So you've at least achieved one new a pair of new members. So thank you very much, Ian.
Right, thank you all very much. Before I finish, I'd just say if you do want to visit Willesley at the moment, it's a bit of a mess because of all the thinning work, and a lot of the rides are very muddy, but they will be rectified hopefully by the spring, and we'll be back to the beginning. And I notice we've still got 40 participants. Thank you all for staying with it for so long. My personal thanks for that.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Ian. That was a fantastic talk. And thank you to Frank and Stuart and the rest of the Oadby Wigston group for arranging such a wonderful speaker. I hope everyone's had a lovely evening. And I would just like to let everybody know that our next talk will be on the 11th of November, and it's hosted by our Charnwood Local group. And it's a fantastic talk all about the biodiversity of Colombia. So we're stepping out of the UK and we're learning about some wildlife far afield. So don't miss that one. There'll be some wonderful photography and videos to watch. And if you would like to find out any more about the Wildlife Trust or our local groups, or if you would like to give a donation towards this talk, please head to our website at www.lrwt.org.uk. And we hope to see you at our next talk. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy your weekends.